Her dad had been her world, and she would give anything to be by his side. But when she received the call about his sudden passing, she knew nothing would ever be the same. Her brothers and sisters kicked her out of their childhood home immediately. They laughed that out of their dad's will. She'd only come out with the old family barn. If only they knew what their dad was planning. But life hadn't always been so bleak for Gemma Miller, the last born of the Miller family. She'd once been a happy woman. But of course, this was when her dad was still alive. He was her everything, from mentor to best friend, and she always strived to make him proud. Her world came crashing down when she received that call about his sudden passing. Like many of us, Gemma never imagined a life without her dad. But the last time she saw him, they'd ended things sourly, fighting over Gemma's future and lifestyle choices. Gemma had fallen pregnant and decided to keep the child. Her dad wanted her to return home so she could be cared for, but she wanted to keep her career going. While he maintained that he only wanted the best for her, Gemma saw it as him trying to control her life. She was away from home when her dad's nurse called her personal cell. Gemma and the nurse were good friends, so she didn't think much of the call. But the nurse's tone would tell her that this wasn't a routine call. Gemma jumped into the first bus home the minute she heard her nurse friend sobbing. Her dad had just gone into cardiac arrest, and EMTs were trying to resuscitate him. Guilt-ridden, Gemma prayed with everything within her that he'd pull through. They'd left things so badly that she didn't know what to do if they didn't patch it up. Although Gemma's dad wasn't the wealthiest in town, he had a few properties around the county that turned heads. His lawyer read his will solemnly, dividing up the properties among Gemma and her 3 siblings. She thought she'd get something of value from everything. She'd been her dad's favorite after all, but as the lawyer continued reading, she realized this wasn't the case. Gemma's relationship with her siblings hadn't always been the best. Her big brothers loathed that she was the most similar to their dad. Gemma's dad left everything to her big brothers, save for a derelict barn some yards away from the family home. They didn't care that she was in her first trimester of pregnancy or that she was their blood and flesh. Gemma watched as car after car drove into the farm, drunk people filling out and running into her childhood home. Furious, she stomped back in to give her brothers a piece of her mind, but they only stared at her before dragging her out. Dejected, Gemma pulled herself from the ground and walked away. She couldn't believe her dad would do this to her. She fished out her phone to call a taxi, but then her sight landed on the barely standing barn. Gemma felt the building with fury and pain churning within her. Wasn't she cut from the same cloth as them? She was still assaulting the building when she heard a voice behind her. The man would make her rethink her dad's will. "I could take it off your hands, you know." Gemma swung around, finding a rotten-teethed man smiling behind her. The old man never really liked it, recognizing the man as one of the farm's neighbors. The man, a rugged farmer always caked in mud and manure, had often butted heads with her father. What he'd reveal would leave her with more questions than answers. He didn't even know Gemma's name, even though he'd known her all her life. "It's not for sale. I wish to grieve in peace, Mr. Halsey." The man only laughed and offered to buy the barn again. He even doubled his initial price. But that only made Gemma more apprehensive. She'd never known her dad as someone who kept secrets before, but Mr. Halsey's words had piqued her interest. The man tried to protest. Gemma pushed the barn's door open and stepped in. Rotten floorboards and walls, rusted railings, and a tractor Gemma had never seen running. At first glance, the place looked like any other abandoned barn. But Gemma felt like there was something more than what met the eye. Soon, her pain was replaced with a burning curiosity to explore the dusty place. She turned on her phone's flashlight and began weaving through old farm tools. When she noticed something tucked into the wall, her brows furrowed as she approached. A folded paper carefully wedged into the rotting wooden planes. Outside, her brother's party was raging on. They laughed at her barn, praising their dad for leaving them all his fortune, while she got practically nothing. Gemma wiped tears as she opened the paper. She had no idea that her life was about to change. The paper was a note written in her dad's name. It seemed old, which didn't make sense to Gemma. How did it survive the harsh seasons in the barn? She opened it and staggered back when she realized her dad had addressed her. He expressed his undying love for her and her brothers, saying they meant the world to him. But at the foot of the note, there was a section about a hidden cellar door in one of the barn's stalls. He had unlocked it and wanted Gemma to explore, saying he'd hidden a cupcake for her to find. She remembered her younger days. Her dad had always hidden cupcakes for her in the house, asking her to root them out if she could. 9 out of 10 times, the cupcakes weren't pastries but items such as storybooks and kids' novels. After a few minutes of searching, Gemma found the cellar door hidden under piles of dry hay and straw. A corridor stretched into the darkness before Gemma. She looked at her dad's note, wondering if she could honor his wish. Could she do this? The walls were white, although layered with dust. Her survival instinct yelled for her to turn back, get her brothers or sell the barn to Mr. M&M all the way to him second. The aspiring veterinarian went down the corridor. It was clear that this place had been sealed for a while, given how dusty it was, and that her brothers didn't know about it. She didn't expect to find much down here, but the premise of a treasure hidden somewhere made her heart beat faster. After 10 minutes of walking, Gemma made it to a room at the end of the corridor. The place was just as dry as the corridor. She stared at her find, suddenly frozen in place. Gemma thought she'd always known her dad. She was his confidant in his older days, and he'd open up about so much to her. She couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement. As she walked into the room, one thing became clear. Her dad wasn't the person she'd always believed he was. When we are young, we see our parents as our heroes. The possibility of them being dangerous individuals in the outside world never occurs to us. Sometimes they are heroes to the outside world, a fact that we never learn while growing up until someone reveals it to us. For Gemma, such secrets would be laid bare tonight. Cupcakes, she whispered. Cupcakes. Lots and lots of cupcakes. Carefully picked up the first one, which had another note stapled to it. The message was short, giving her a clue of what was happening. Another package had a Glenfiddich bottle. One vintage bottle like this could go for thousands of dollars. Gemma couldn't even count the number of packages before her.